Thank you for coming. So today our lecture is on the golden age of the violin, and it's called the golden age because it's known for the proliferation of wonderful solo violinists that were active during the first 4 decades of the 20th century. Characterized by beauty of sound and individuality of interpretation, this overabundance of outstanding violinists is unrivaled by any other era. Beginning with the letter A for Leopold Auer, the list extends right through to the letter Z for Ephraim Zimbalist. And it was not restricted to one region. Every country seemed to produce a violinist of note. Taking the letter S, we have, for example, Tasha Seidel, the rival of young Jascha Heifetz. Seidel was known as the devil, Heifetz the angel. We have Albert Salmons from England. We have Denise Soriano from France, Arrigo Serrato from Italy, Albert Spalding from the US, Zoltán Shekai from Hungary, and even from the Far East, Shinichi Suzuki, who of course founded the Suzuki violin method. For lovers of violin music, and the violin music in particular, this period represented a kind of embarrassment of riches. Fortunately, these remarkable violinists coincided with the development of sound recording, and during the course of this talk, we'll be able to hear samples of these unique artists. Due to limitations of time, however, we'll need to be selective. So sadly, I won't be able to play any of the names already mentioned, nor such giants as Huberman, Ionesco, Busch, Heifetz, Milstein, Franciscati, Oistrakh, or Menuhin. But let's start with 2 important figures from the preceding era, Joseph Joachim and Pablo de Sarasate, both of whom were born in the first half of the 19th century. Hungarian by birth, Joachim was renowned for the spiritual depth of his interpretations and venerated as the greatest interpreter of German masterworks. No less than Felix Mendelssohn took a special interest in the young Joachim, and they performed numerous dual sonatas together, and Mendelssohn even conducted the 13-year-old prodigy in the Beethoven Concerto with his Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra. An opponent of the so-called New German School of Wagner and Liszt, Joachim allied himself with the great classical masters Bach and Beethoven and became part of the circle of musicians that included Mendelssohn and Schumann. Later, Brahms joined their ranks and became one of Joachim's closest friends. The violinist premiered many of his younger colleagues' compositions and helped advise the young composer on the solo violin writing in Brahms' Violin Concerto. Brahms regarded Joachim as a gifted composer in his own right and felt it was unfortunate that the violinist wasn't able to produce more compositions. In his later years, Joachim established an important string quartet and taught a significant number of students in Berlin. According to the conductor Henry Wood, a quiet classical serenity, free from any trace of exaggeration and always musical and scholarly, Joachim was forever conscious of his dignity. Now let's listen to a sample of Joachim performing one of Brahms's well-known Hungarian dances. This was made in Berlin in 1903, and Joachim was over 70 years old when he recorded it. Representing an entirely different aesthetic from the lofty Joachim was the dashing virtuoso Pablo de Sarasate. Born in Pamplona, Spain, Sarasate gained the attention of Queen Isabella, who became his benefactor and sponsored his studies at the Paris Conservatoire. Unlike Joachim, Sarasate had little affinity with the Beethoven and Brahms concertos. Albert Spalding, the American violinist, wrote that Sarasate, quote, played Beethoven with the perfumed polish of a courtier who doesn't quite believe what he is saying to majesty. As for the Brahms concerto, Sarasate once remarked, "Why should I stand there while the oboe has the only proper melody in the whole piece?" But it would be unfair to dismiss Sarasate on the basis of his musical tastes. According to the great violinist and pedagogue Leopold Auer, Sarasate was the master of a perfected technique for both hands. He played without any effort at all, touching the strings with a magic bow in a manner that had no hint of the terrestrial. Furthermore, apart from his remarkable prowess on his instrument, Sarasate was a masterful interpreter who inspired composers as different as Bruch, Saint-Saëns, Lalo, and Wieniawski to write major violin works dedicated to him. Even the venerable Joachim wrote a set of variations for his Spanish contemporary. Here's an extract of Sarasate playing one of his own pieces. Like the Joachim recording, it was made in 1903, but in Paris, just as Sarasate was approaching his 60th birthday. The violinist and pedagogue, Carl Flesch, described Sarasate as the ideal embodiment of the salon violinist. But he added that the history of violin playing cannot be imagined without him. But for Flesch, an even more important figure in the development of the art of violin playing was the Belgian virtuoso Eugene Ysaÿe. He represented the synthesis between technical perfection and the greatest intensity of expression. Flesch also declared him to be the most outstanding and individual violinist I have ever heard in my life. In a sense, Joachim combined the eloquent musicianship of Joachim and the dashing virtuosity of Sarasate. Having studied with two legendary 19th century virtuosos, Violin and Wieniawski, Ysaÿe embodied the grand romantic style and carried it into the early 20th century. Ysaÿe's career developed more slowly than either Joachim or Sarasate, and he started out his career playing in orchestras. At the age of 21, however, he became concertmaster of what became eventually the Berlin Philharmonic. While in Berlin, he met Joachim, who was overwhelmed by the playing of the dynamic young virtuoso. During his years with the orchestra, Ysaÿe gradually established himself as a soloist, and it was a series of dual recitals with the celebrated Russian pianist Anton Rubinstein that eventually established him as a soloist of the first rank. In the mid-1880s, Joachim left Berlin and settled in Paris. He established a dual partnership with Raoul Pugnot, the leading French pianist of the day, and inspired many French composers to write works especially for him. As it turns out, three of the most important French masterpieces written at the end of the 19th century were dedicated to Ysaÿe: Debussy's String Quartet in G minor, Franck's Violin Sonata, and the Chausson Poème. Cutting a gigantic figure due to his enormous physical size, Ysaÿe had a big personality match. Spalding remarked that, quote, his famous Guarnerius violinist tucked under his chin looked like a half-size fiddle. Let's now listen to the tremendous sweep of Ysaÿe's playing in a 1911 recording of the last movement from Mendelssohn's beloved Violin Concerto. Besides his playing, Ysaÿe made an enormous contribution to the violin repertoire with his 6 sonatas for solo violin completed in 1924. Each is dedicated to a violinist friend of Ysaÿe, and the Sonata No. 4, which you'll be hearing this evening, is dedicated to Fritz Kreisler. Now we'll turn to another violinist, but from Russia. At the beginning of the 20th century, Russia, of course, was the gateway to the exotic East. And this vast country produced a significant number of important violinists. The first of these was Misha Elman. Born in a hut with a dirt floor in the Pale of Settlement where Russian Jews were confined, Elman became the role model for all children of aspiring Jewish parents to get out of the ghetto. He was, in a sense, the original Fiddler on the Roof. At the age of 6, Elman's family moved to Odessa on the Black Sea. This port city was a hotbed of musical talent, boasting violinists such as Nathan Milstein, Tozzy Spivakovsky, and David Oistrach, as well as the pianists Emil Galels, Beno Mazejevich, Vladimir Pachman, Shura Cherkassky, and Simon Berer. At 12, Elman became a student of the famed Leopold Auer, the Hungarian-born virtuoso who served as solo violinist for the Russian Tsar. And he was certainly the most important violin teacher of the Golden Age that we're talking about. As noted in the Gershwin song, Misha, Yasha, Tasha, Sasha, when we began, our notes were sour, until a man, Professor Auer, set out to show us one and all how we could pack them in old Albert Hall. By the time Elman was in his mid-teens, he was already regarded as one of the most important violinists of his age. He had performed in all the major capitals of Europe, Berlin, London, and Paris, and was invited to Buckingham Palace when the King of Spain came to visit by King Edward VII. What distinguished Elman's playing most of all was his sumptuous sound. Known as der Geiger mit der goldenen Ton, the violinist with the golden tone, Elman made sounds in the violin that were simply ravishing. Let's hear him in an extract from Max Bruch's adaptation of Kol Nidre, the Jewish incantation spoken at Yom Kippur. Listen how Elman incants each note with meaning, contemplating each word with deep significance. In the middle section, Elman sings like an impassioned cantor, unashamedly bursting in feeling. Going back to Central Europe, we'll go back west, let's now hear Jacques Thibaud, the French violinist par excellence. An engaging raconteur with a taste for fine wine and women, Thibaud was born, fittingly enough, in Bordeaux, the wine capital of France. His ability to weave the most elaborate tales in a single phrase prompted the musicologist Paul Viardot to remark that Sarasate was a mechanical nightingale, while Thibaud was the real live nightingale. Thibaud's playing also has a seductive quality unique among string players. One could describe Thibaud as a violinist who most embodies sensuality in violin playing, summarized by Carl Flesch as he exhibited unadulterated eroticism. Thibaud's sonata recordings with Alfred Cortot, as well as the trio recordings with the two of them joined by Pablo Casals, rank among the gems of recorded history. And here he is with Alfred Cortot. But let's now hear Thibaud in a violin and piano arrangement by Saint-Saëns of a slow movement from a Mozart piano concerto. Moving back eastward from France to Hungary, we now encounter Joseph Szigeti, one of the most cultured violinists of the Golden Age. Renowned for his penetrating interpretation, Szigeti was a great champion of new works. He was friends with Bartók and Stravinsky and often played their works in his recitals. He was also renowned for his imaginative programming, often including chamber works such as Bartók's Contrasts or the Brahms Horn Trio in his recitals. According to Ysaÿe, Szigeti was at the same time a virtuoso and a musician, placing technique at the service of expression. Yet, along with his intelligence and cultivated taste, Szigeti was steeped in the romantic violin tradition. His aristocratic performance of one of Bartók's Hungarian folk song arrangements is full of deep expression and haunting beauty, as we'll hear. Szigeti actually wrote a wonderful autobiography, beautifully written, and when he talks about his youth, coming from provincial Hungary, he recalled that when he went to Berlin, he was bowled over hearing three violinists, Ysaÿe, Elman, and Kreisler. For him, these three figures conveyed, quote, a playing of fire, elegance, and rhythmic incisiveness that I had never even imagined. We've already heard Ysaÿe and Elman, so now let's turn to Fritz Kreisler, the main focus of our talk today. uniquely distinctive Fritz Kreisler in an extract from the slow movement of the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. The son of a Polish doctor who immigrated to Vienna, Fritz Kreisler grew up in a cultural milieu that included Arthur Schnabel and Sigmund Freud as family friends. Kreisler began life as a remarkable musical prodigy. He graduated from the Vienna Conservatory at the age of 10 and followed his studies for 2 years at the Paris Conservatoire, where he carried off the Premier Prix at the age of 12. The following year, he made a highly successful 6-month tour of the United States. After his prodigy years, however, Kreisler's career faltered somewhat, and the young violinist wasn't sure if music was to be his destiny. He laid aside the violin and studied medicine briefly at the University of Vienna with the noted surgeon Theodor Billroth, a music lover who was a close friend of Brahms. But following in the footsteps of his doctor father was not to be, and Kreisler soon decided to return to music. The road back was not so smooth, however. He failed an audition for a second violin post in the Vienna Philharmonic, but he persevered and soon became regarded as one of the major violinists of his time. Following his debut with the Vienna Philharmonic at the age of 25, Kreisler was acknowledged as an outstanding violinist. The great Ysaÿe remarked, "I have arrived at the top, but Kreisler is on the ascendant, and in a short time, he will be the greater artist." Here is Kreisler playing an extract from the Violin Concerto of Brahms, whom Kreisler had venerated as a child growing up in Vienna. Listen to the pacing in this intimate moment from the slow movement, in which every note has life and meaning all its own. As would be expected from someone born in Vienna, Kreisler's Mozart playing was unsurpassed. Here, Kreisler plays an extract from the rondo movement of Mozart's Hafner Serenade. Listen to the refined elegance of his approach, never rushed, breathing life into every note. His phrasing is really inimitable. By the second decade of the 20th century, Kreisler was the violinist equivalent to Caruso and Paderewski, and he was dubbed the king of violinists. Here he is, with Casals on the right cello, Harold Bauer, the pianist, on the top, and the conductor, Walter Damrosch, Kreisler on the left. Kreisler further endeared himself to a wide audience by playing popular songs of the day. But it wasn't just the fact that he programmed popular tunes, but that he could communicate to a vast audience in any genre, whether it was by J.S. Bach or Irving Berlin. In our next example, he plays Rudolf Frimmel's Indian Love Call from the 1924 musical Rose Marie, made famous by the 1930s film starring Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald. In this love duet, the Canadian Mountie sings, "I'll Be Loving You," answered in turn by Rose Marie. Now, Kreisler never patronized these little miniatures, and he played them with the same care and commitment necessary for a masterpiece by Bach or Beethoven. And listen how beautifully Kreisler sings the double stops. They're really like two singers. Kreisler himself contributed enormously to the violin repertoire with numerous original compositions in the Viennese tradition of the Strauss family, Lehar, and Waldteufel. Among his most well-known tunes is the Liebesfreude, Love's Joy. This 1928 recording is quintessential Kreisler. His fast yet focused vibrato, combined with his incisive bow strokes, have a rhythmic life all its own, yet they convey an elegance and ease. And this uncanny combination of relaxation and intensity is perhaps the most unique defining feature of Kreisler's playing. Although Kreisler composed many original compositions, he also published a number of pieces under the names of forgotten composers. Here is a piece he passed off as a work by Louis Couperin. Now, the fact that Kreisler could pass this off as a work by a Baroque composer shows how little was known about these Baroque music, certainly at that time. Now, one thing that his original compositions reflect is Kreisler's keen sense of harmony and fluency in counterpoint. As a precocious violin student at the Vienna and Paris conservatoires, he had studied with Anton Bruckner and Leo Delibes, respectively. Let's now listen to Kreisler's arrangement of the Paganini First Violin Concerto. This is Paganini mit Schlag, with luscious harmonies a la Richard Strauss and a superb display of contrapuntal imagination in the addition of a new cello melody against the main theme. Well, having heard some samples of the violinist's delightful compositions, one of the treats in tonight's concert is the opportunity to hear Kreisler's full-length string quartet in A minor. This work was composed immediately after the First World War, when Kreisler, who had served briefly as an officer in the Austrian army, was branded as an enemy alien. After the war, Kreisler's concerts were protested by numerous conservative groups, forcing the violinist to cancel a number of engagements. The result was time for him to compose a full-length work. And this string quartet Kreisler called his Avowal of Vienna. You'll hear, again in this excerpt, a thorough command of late 19th century tonal language with echoes of Schoenberg's Verklärte Nacht and the luscious chromaticism of Wolfgang Korngold. This quartet really reveals another facet of Kreisler, his deeply reflective and serious nature. Although most well known for his charming short pieces, his deep musicianship really was quite unmatched. Now let's hear him in his only recording of solo Bach he ever made. With today's ears, this extract would seem to be in direct opposition with the current historical performance movement, which aims for authenticity in the playing of early music. Matters of style are certainly important, but all too often the focus is concentrated upon the surface execution at the expense of the musical meaning. In this extract, Kreisler offers a noble reading that gets to the core of the work's spiritual essence. playing of Fritz Kreisler really captures a bygone era in music. It reflects the cultural heritage of Vienna, the capital of music, the city of Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, Bruckner, Brahms, Mahler, but also that of Franz Lehár and Johann Strauss. This golden age is one filled with charm and grace. Perhaps Kreisler himself said it best when on the occasion of his 75th birthday he reflected, "If I have one regret, it is that in our present mechanical age, the growing generation of musicians may never be able to experience that indescribable, intangible something that made the profession of a musician so beautiful and satisfying in my time and age." Here, to end our talk today, is Fritz Kreisler playing the closing bars from the operetta aria in Chambre séparée by Richard Heuberger. Thank you.